You're all having a great Thursday. Excited to host our Traction Lab office hours here. Our weekly startup reality check, Ask Us Anything. I will be going solo today. So, JDM has the day off. No, he's tackling some things with the family with the new kiddo in stow. You'll be rocking and rolling with me here today. So excited to answer your questions. We did get pre-submitted questions as we usually do. So thank you for those that plugged in and had those questions. So we'll be diving into those here shortly. But in the meantime, do throw any questions you have in the chat if you're hopping on live. That's how we've structured this time. So we prioritize the live ones and then go to the other questions in the meantime. So maybe as I buy a second or two for any questions that come in. Again, we do have our Traction Lab Investment Readiness Engine applications live. So just go to tractionlab.io/IRE, and that will be where you can apply for that. So we have applications live. The goal of that program is to help you, one, systematically build your growth engine. So building that process of ultimately that predictable, repeatable, and scalable path to growth, and then translating that into your fundraising narrative that will help you be successful in raising capital. And so we'll be selecting 15 teams for the Traction Lab Investment Readiness Engine. Additionally, we'll be launching our next cohort of the Traction Lab Venture School. The way that that's structured is it's a year-long worth of support from the Traction Lab team. You'll get plugged into our Traction Lab Venture School community. So we have a online community where you can ask questions on a regular basis, and then also share your homework as you kind of move through the venture creation process. We'll dive in and support you in there. And then we also have private office hours for that particular community. So similar to how we have this, you get to hop in live with JDM and myself and other founders in the cohort. Lastly is we support you in running 8 framework sessions. So we deep dive into that growth engine mechanics. So help you really apply the scientific principles to building your startup, but particularly on the growth engine aspect. So with that, I'll hop into the pre-submitted questions and appreciate that, Isaac. So would love to be curious of why I'm better, but nonetheless appreciate the kind words. But let's hop in if there's no questions out there. So the first question submitted, the venture is a B2B SaaS. They're in the small business vertical. The quick pitch of the company is they're a scheduling and dispatch software for independent HVAC and plumbing contractors. So the thing that the founder is working through, so they've done 32 discovery interviews. Nearly everyone confirmed the pain and said they would use the product. The founders has ultimately spent 4 months building an MVP and gave all 32 of those individuals, they did discovery conversations with free access, but only 3 have logged in and they've only done it once. 0 have come back to her. And ultimately the question is, should I add features to get them active, or do I need to interview a new segment? And so where we want to target to start is that, again, that say-do gap. So we had these series of conversations, 32 of them. So there's a good quantity of them, but I would say the depth of moving from interest to intent was a little bit lean. And so when we're looking at this discovery, we're saying, yes, people are reporting the pain. But again, that kind of leads to the question of, were they self-reporting this pain point, or was this something where they actually, I guess, self-reported it, or did you kind of lead them in saying like, hey, is this a pain that you experience? But then also tying to that 2x2 matrix that we look at, both having a severe pain point as well as an urgent pain point. And that's kind of the gold mine of pains that we want to be focusing on. But then what we could have likely done is moved into some sort of commitment. So outside of them just purely saying, oh, I have the pain, are they willing to then move into taking some sort of action? And so we use the team framework. So if you've been plugging into these office hours, you've probably heard us talk about the team framework many times, which is a way for us to close that say do gap. So team stands for time, effort, access, and money. And those are the four asks that we can move from interest to intent. And so asking for time. So say taking those 32 discovery interviews and asking them to actually give us some time on their calendar. So say not just 30 minutes of time, but an hour and a half to run through the product demo, right? If they're not really that committed, they're not likely to spend an hour and a half hearing us go through the product demo and spending that time. They'll likely say, oh, it's not worth it. And so we would already get some level of clarity related to their intent versus the interest that they said related to the pain point. Additionally, around effort. So again, it didn't even sound like we had them sign up for a wait list. We just kind of like threw them and gave them free access, right? And so if we had them do some level of effort to say, hey, sounds like this is a pain point that you're experiencing, will you sign up for our wait list, but actually adding a significant kind of contribution where maybe they have to map out what they're currently experiencing and taking a more robust for lack of a better term survey related to that particular problem to join the waitlist, right? So they have to put some effort into it going forward. Access might not be as clear here. This is often usually could be asking them to provide access to a whole nother set of people who have the problem. And if it's not something that's probably urgent, severe, they're not likely to say, hey, here's someone that I'm willing to make a connection with. And then the M is for money, which is having them actually put a credit card down and pay to have this problem solved. So those would be the areas of focus. So one, just recognizing that probably overspent time on the MVP, that being like overbuilding because we didn't have enough true intent yet to build it. We had some inklings of pain points, but we didn't really get to ever the problem solution fit. So saying, would this right size solution solve that particular problem? And then we ultimately optimize for people that didn't truly have that intent. And so to the question, should you add features to get them to be active or go interview a new segment? Well, I wouldn't add new features. I'd probably go back to some level of conversation with them and see if there's actually true intent. And then if you're wanting to continue to go down the path was like, yes, pursuing a particular different segment in the market, but I would again apply things like the mom test to those conversations and then really move from that just purely hey, their problem exists to getting some sort of commitment before you go build the next iteration of the MVP. So that's where we're at to date. So that's kind of that first scenario. So thank you for sharing that, and hopefully that tackled your question here. I'm going to hop into Isaac's question here that threw in live. So thank you for the question. I'm going to throw it up on the screen. So in terms of Isaac's question here, so hoping to find some groups that are interested in being early adopters for their service. Are there communities you're aware of that focus on early adoption? And so, one, thank you for the question. I think the first thing that comes to mind for me, I'm not super aware of exactly what you're building. So if you're willing to throw that in the chat, that might be helpful. Or what is the core problem that you're solving for? That would be where I would ultimately start. And so when we think about the early adopter, the framework we use is the early adopter pyramid. So if you haven't come across that, I highly recommend doing that. So when we think about this customer persona, it starts with understanding that they obviously have to have the problem that we're aiming to solve for. So you have to have the problem. They then have to have awareness of the problem. So if they're not aware that they have the problem, they're not going to be then actively looking for a solution, which is that next filter that we want to be focusing on. So they have to have the problem, be aware they have the problem. They then have to actively be searching for a solution. Then they, because of the urgency and severity related to this pain point, they've likely hacked together some sort of solution. So they're trying to solve it in some way, but it's not currently optimal. And then lastly, is they've acquired a budget to solve this particular problem. And so we want to target that very tippy top of the early adopter pyramid. And the reason we do that is because ultimately the urgency and severity is driving the need for them to ultimately have a solution. And so bringing in a new innovation, that's going to be the most efficient path to getting paying customers. And so that's who we want to target. And so I guess how I'm hearing the question, and I think it can lead to some risks, is people go and target like serial early adopters. And so what that looks like is using things like Kickstarter or Product Hunt, where they naturally just are like, I want to try new things because I want to try new things. But if we're trying to build a scalable startup, that doesn't give us predictability in getting our next set of customers. And so we ultimately might optimize for people who just like to try things early, and maybe they're willing to pay a little bit of money to try it out. But oftentimes those things are like a Product Hunt. Often that might lead to them using it for free. And then when you go to put a paywall in front of them for an actual paying customer, that doesn't convert. On the side of Kickstarter was, people just on those platforms are naturally just wanting to buy products early to give it to test it out, but in the long run they might not actually be the core focus of your business. And so the risk we run in that sense of like having those big launch things with these early adopter platforms is that they ultimately don't replicate. You can't do it again. It's a one shot and then you're done. And so that element of when we think about building a scalable venture, scalability requires repeatability, and repeatability requires predictability. And so these platforms don't enable that. And so it'd be more effective use of your time to narrow down on that early adopter pyramid and say, who do we believe this is, and where are they trying to solve for it now? So we say the existing alternatives. And then from there, what channels can we use to get in front of them? And there's the way we approach the channels. We use a framework called growth hacking or channel hacking, which is what's something that's easy to implement, but then gets us in front of a lot of those customers. So it's another 2x2 matrix that you can look up. So one, adding in some context. So thank you, Isaac, for the context here. So I'm going to share it out loud. So Isaac's built a marketplace where people can buy, sell, and trade what they own or provide, so goods, services, etc. That would normally be pretty routine and boring. The difference in the marketplace versus others is that theirs is a web service, finds deals that aren't normally able to happen and bring in multiple other parties to make it all work. So rather than a one-to-one deal where we both have to want what the person has, this site might include 5 to 10 or 100 parties to make the transaction all work. So specifically looking for groups with high trust and integrity, possibly even groups where the members are fairly concentrated in one area who can buffer some of these challenges and with challenges with my new service. So thanks for that context. So I think the key element is like any marketplace requires what we call liquidity. And so it's the marketplace is only as good as those transactions taking place. And then ultimately for your purpose, you want those transactions to take place on platform, because then that's where you're able to monetize it or actually have the value generation connected to the thing that you've built versus that going offline, and then you're not able to capture that overall. And so one of the components is like narrowing down like what and I know you have a unique ability in terms of how you've designed this platform to where there's kind of like a multiple transaction connection for this to take place. And so part of it is like, who are the people that are experiencing the pain with current marketplaces? So for example, I'm not on one of those marketplaces trying to buy and sell my services or various goods. So who's the person on there that's, going to Facebook Marketplace and trying to sell something? And is it they're trying to sell used furniture, and then they want to transact for a gardener, right, or something? And so what are some of those core focus areas in narrowing down like what's the main platform they're going on now? Is it Shopify or Pinterest, or what are the solutions they're targeting now? And you mentioned things around trust. And so do they not trust the current platforms? And is that because the transaction takes place off of it and they're not verified? Or what is the mechanism of where the lack of trust is coming from in that place? And so if you're going to be adding value of trust and integrity, that sounds to be an aim. What features are enabling that to take place, and then who are the people that are not currently trusting those systems, is if that's kind of the target of yours. So that's how we would be thinking about it. But the I think the challenge ahead of you is you have multiple stakeholders, and so you really want to understand what is the most efficient path to getting the right people on the platform that are going to transact with each other. And so, like, you don't want to have someone who's offering accounting services and landscaping services and someone selling a couch, and none of those people want the thing the other person has. So obviously, what we call density is really key of those transactions to take place. And so, what are the ones that are currently falling through the cracks or not taking place on the existing platforms? And so, maybe to your I guess maybe part of it goes back to Isaac, you starting this venture, like you saw some sort of problem or need, or maybe experienced it yourself, and where was that taking place, and what was the transactions that were kind of falling through? So thank you for those additions. If you have follow-ups, throw those in the chat. Happy to continue to add on. But I will continue on to our next pre-submitted question. And then if you throw something in addition, I'll follow up with it. So, all right, a little quick water break. All right, so this next pre-submitted question, it's a type of venture. It's a B2C subscription app. The pitch is it's an app that builds an adaptive sleep schedule for parents of infants. So maybe we should send this to JDM so you get some better sleep. In terms of a scenario, the founder went viral on TikTok and collected 1,200 waitlist emails. They've spent 3 months since refining onboarding flows, brand identity, and app store assets ahead of launch, but nobody has been asked for money at this stage. The question the founder has that they want to explore is which premium features should be in the launch tier. So I think the first thing that I want to point out is, you went viral, you had these 1,200 people sign up on the wait list. It's a big number, but the question we then have is, like, are those the right 1,200 people, or were they just, there wasn't much commitment they had to make? So again, to like the prior question was, the prior scenario that was submitted, there was maybe potentially no real ask of effort or need. And so, yeah, I gave you my email, and then maybe it's my spam email, so not a big deal. And so what's truly the interest of that? It's better than them like not engaging. So I do want to qualify on some of that. But we then spent a whole bunch of time leading up to what we're going to do as this launch, onboarding, brand identity, even though we've never yet onboarded someone nor know if they're truly that that they have that big of an intent to pay or willingness to pay. And so we've kind of overbuilt this process, and we call this kind of procrastivity. So we've procrastinated with a lot of activity, hiding behind the real thing that we need to focus on, which we call is that kill question. The thing that's going to kill our venture is, are any of these 1,200 people willing to pay? And I know you're trying to explore what these premium features are, but it sounds like you're going to have a baseline tier anyways. And so can you get any of those 1,200 people to sign up for the baseline tier before we even launch a premium and add new features, right? So we're hiding behind all of this activity in avoidance of asking that really hard question that might disprove all of that viral nature. And so the way we want to think about it is we want to move up that ladder of evidence. So thinking related to, okay, 1,200 people on the wait list, how do we get them to do a greater level of commitment? So, hey, we're leading to launch. We're going to give access to the first paying customers, and we have 100 slots. Well, does anyone pay? If not, we have our answer. Who cares about a premium feature set? We can't even get the 1,200 people to sign up for our baseline set of features that attracted them in the first place. And so we really want to dive into moving from that interest to intent. The last thing that I want to highlight here is what we call the time to customer. So I actually just dropped one of our Traction Lab or Traction Thinking articles today. That's one of the skills that and habits that high conviction founders have is the time to customer. So they're efficient in putting things in front of customers because at the end of the day, that's where everything goes to either get validated or die. And so we want to, instead of spending months, these 3 months building onboarding flows that we don't even know again if someone's going to opt in to the next phase of what we're creating, we're kind of not spending the right amount of energy and effort focusing on the core efforts that might actually prove us wrong in that process. So those are the key highlights that I want to identify there. So thank you again for that question. I'll take a quick pause here, see if there's any questions in the chat. But if not, I'll move. I have two more questions that were submitted. So again, if you're hopping in live, just throw your question in the chat. Or if you're just joining and want to share, hey, I'm here and working on this, would love to hear that too. All right, so our next pre-submitted question, it's a B2B vertical SaaS. It's targeting mid-market in terms of their pitch. It's a safety training compliance platform for commercial construction subcontractors. And the scenario is the founder, this founder has run 5 free pilots over 8 months. Every pilot contact praises the product and extends the evaluation, and every buying conversation slides to next quarter. So it seems like every time they put like, hey, time to like have the conversation about buying this, it gets pushed off. And then they wanted to know whether cutting the price by 40% would convert them. And so where I want to focus, this is not, if this isn't your first time on the Traction Lab weekly startup reality check, that you know exactly where I'm going to focus the time and energy, and that's going to be doing an autopsy on the pilot itself. One of the risks that we see is in running these free pilots, right? What we've asked for their commitment is to give us feedback. So again, how this was submitted was every pilot contact praises the product and extends the evaluation, meaning they're like excited about, hey, here's what it's doing, and they're happy to give feedback. But when push comes to shove of saying, hey, time to become a paying customer, that continues to slide. And so, yeah, that might be just purely like, hey, I don't want to have that conversation. But what it also is showing is maybe there's not truly intent for them to actually pay. And so they feel like they're paying you by giving you feedback in that process. And so one of the things looking back for all of those that are here learning from this founder and kind of how they set up their pilot is the more we can structure the key success metrics that we're going to deliver on, those should be tied to the value proposition that we are ultimately driving. So if we're saving time, increasing operational effectiveness, or we're driving new revenue, whatever that might be, we need to set what those metrics are. And then we need to give the right time frame for that to take place, or at least to have leading indicators to prove that that timeline is on the right path. And so we want it to be time bound. So if we don't set a time, then we get in this situation where basically that conversation continue to slide from quarter to quarter versus saying, hey, we're giving you pilot access from this time to this time. And in 60 days, we're going to evaluate our success or lack thereof. And then here's kind of the terms for payment that we're going to be discussing. And so the more you can have that conversation up front, one gives you that marker to target. 2 is you can have the tough conversation earlier where, oh, actually, if I have to become a paying customer, I'm not actually in the market. Well, yeah, that sucks to hear that, but we have that conversation now versus waiting, 60 days and building all these things for someone that isn't going to be a paying customer. And so we want to optimize for those that are actually willing to pay and have that urgent and severe pain point. And so thinking about a real pilot structure is if we can charge up front, that's key. We want to define some success up front. So if we say cut incident reporting prep time by 20% in 60 days, you'll purchase at X dollars a month, in the form of an annual contract or monthly recurring fee, whatever that might be. The last thing that can come from having that conversation is, and kind of maybe reading between the lines here, is an element of understanding who the actual economic buyer is. So maybe in the case of who we set this pilot up with is ultimately the end user, so they get a lot of value out of it, but at the end of the day, they're not the person making the decision, or it's not coming out of their budget. And so they're going to have to convince someone else of why they should pay for it. And so if we actually have a more documented pilot and commitment, they actually have to go to that person beforehand. And so you get to understand the purchasing process and who the actual economic buyer is, and see what value we need to create for them. So that's how I would tackle this. I wouldn't cut it 40% to finalize the deal, because that's likely going to impact your long-term value, in the sense of, obviously you're cutting a large portion of your revenue, but also we're potentially just more optimizing for someone who's not a paying customer. Cool. All right. I have one last pre-submitted question. So before I get to that, I want to make sure, make space for any questions that are here live. So if you're just hopping in, feel free to throw in the chat any questions you're working through, or if you just want to share what you're working on in general, that would be awesome too. So we appreciate you hopping in, and I will tackle the next pre-submitted question here. All right. Let me get a quick little sip here. All right. So this is a deep tech B2B. So it's a hardware and machine learning solution. The pitch is it's an acoustic sensors and machine learning that flag bearing failure in industrial pumps weeks before breaking down. Very cool. So it uses acoustic sensors and machine learning that flag bearing failure in industrial pipes. Okay, cool, or pumps. So the scenario is it's a technical founder with a working prototype. They have one signed LOI. They've raised a small pre-seed that's in the bank. And then ultimately every VC meeting ends up fairly warm, and every follow-up comes back with more traction. So they want to see more traction is what they're getting. They're frustrated and wants help defining what traction even means with an 18-month hardware sales cycle. So I think there's a couple ways to look at it. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is what we talk about related to our investor feedback pyramid. So one of the things, there's different levels of what the feedback can come from. So the first one is what we call thesis level feedback. Then there's communication level feedback. Then there's actual business model feedback that we're focusing on. And so in this case, my interpretation, again, I'm not in these conversations and have very little data here. But oftentimes, if we're just hearing get more traction, this is usually what we call is like thesis level feedback. So meaning you're likely targeting VCs at the wrong stage, or it's the wrong type of fund. So for example, you're a deep tech solution that's B2B. So there's a lot of like research behind the solution that's going to drive it forward. And maybe you're targeting, VCs that invest much later on. So you have to be at 500K ARR. And so obviously when they say we need to see more traction is like, you just aren't at the stage that we invest in. So no matter where you're at, up until that threshold, they're not going to invest in you. And so it's not a matter of like, don't go focus on traction, but it's we don't need to necessarily optimize for that investor when that's not even where our milestone is in terms of where our focus is. So say you're raising a round and it's going to get you to your first 100K in ARR. Well, you're not even going to be at that point until your next round of capital anyways. And so the next one could be the wrong fund. So meaning they maybe only invest in B2B SaaS companies, and that's not what you're ultimately operating in. And so we need to understand who we're pitching to, the right size of checks. And so some of the things that we could do is one, go check out their current portfolio. So are we even a thesis alignment with that in terms of the check sizes that they write? Is that aligned with that as well? And then in terms of the traction, them saying more traction is just couched as you're just not the right thesis fit for us. And some might be direct and say, hey, you're just not a fit based on our thesis, but most of them want to keep that door open and add some of those elements. The last thing I would hone in on, obviously we only had a limited submission here, so this could be more robust than I'm thinking about. But in terms of the LOI, we really want to dive into what's actually a part of that commitment, right? And so these could be really soft commitments. So yeah, we agree to purchase this upon X, versus like we have a really strong LOI that we agree upon you actually delivering your first working prototype or MVP that we'll buy X number of these acoustic sensors, and it'll go in this project for this particular price, right? And so we actually have some stronger terms, and we have the commitment of that economic buyer. So to that same scenario prior was we have a proper decision maker in the room who signed that with like true commitment to do something. Again, it's not legally binding, but has way more evidence built into it in terms of it just purely being an LOI. So I don't know if that's true or not, but there wasn't a ton of detail spoken to it. And so if that had that more robust element, that would maybe also suffice for quote unquote more traction. But again, that's only right sizing it towards some of your investors. And so, lastly, is in the deep tech space, there's kind of two things you want to be focusing on and right sizing the connectivity to two. And so, I don't know where this founder would be. Recognizing it's a technical founder, they're likely to be a little further on what we call as the technology readiness level, or TRL. And so, when we think about going through that process, was like, where are you in terms of the technology development, but also right sizing that with our CRL, so customer readiness level. So understanding the needs of the market. And so are we just purely in a market hypothesis, or is that strength of evidence related to that letter of intent much stronger? And do we have a target in mind for someone who we can get the next letter of intent, right? And obviously more robust letters of intent, and more of them would speak to what that looks like, because then we have clear path of here's the predictability for what this looks like going forward, and understanding that we could then translate those maybe letters of intent into paid pilots going forward. So understanding what those purchase terms and how we then might refine our prototype to meet those particular needs. So I think the last thing, tying to that traction and then understanding you have an 18-month hardware sales cycle is, again, the more you can map out what we believe that process to be, and how are we sufficiently setting these leading indicators to prove true intent along that sales cycle will be key. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to pause here, see if there's some comments or questions that come into the chat. All right. I think maybe we just got one more submitted. Okay, we did get one more submitted here. So I'll take that pre-submitted question. But what I will do is, again, if you have any questions live, throw them in the chat. Would love to make sure we right size for all of you that are joining us today. Additionally, I'm going to pull up the article that I wrote today, that I dropped today. And this is tied to one of the questions of prioritizing shortening time to customer. So if you want to check out that is thrown in the chat. And all right, here's the last pre-submitted question. So, all right, our last one here. It's a B2B SaaS, and they're considering a pivot. So, all right, interested in diving more into that. And then in terms of the scenario, they feel like they validated the problem in interviews. They've built the product, but they've ran into some stalling. So agencies who their target. Oh, I skipped what it is. It's an AI powered resume screening for boutique staffing agencies. So in terms of these agencies, they won't change their workflow, and cold outbound gets no replies. Ultimately, three prospects recently mentioned interview scheduling pain in passing. So she's ready to build the product around scheduling. Their question is, how do I know this pivot is the right one? So great questions. There's two things that I really want to highlight. So the first is just the various types of pivots. So the first is we can do an audience pivot. So we change who we're ultimately targeting. So who's the kind of end customer? So if it's not the agencies, who else is it? So is there another set of problems that we're seeing out there? Additionally, we can do a product pivot. So ultimately, this is what the founder is proposing, is doing a product pivot. And then lastly is there's a distribution pivot. So changing the channel or mechanism to get in front of those right customers going forward. And so one of the things is, this might be a channel failure. We don't yet have maybe sufficient evidence. So we, did have through some conversations, it sounds like there was a problem in these interviews. I would push to say move from interest to intent, so getting that commitment. But then we're not getting outreach on that. And so is that truly that the product isn't the right product, or is it that that's not the right channel to get in front of them? And so do we want to pivot the product, which is a big shift in how we're building the business, based on just a channel that's not working, right? It could be much easier to say, well, maybe this isn't the right way to get in front of them. There's other means for us to do this. And so, this kind of comes to the foundational challenge that all roads lead to distribution, right? So you might have the best product in the world and you're solving a big problem, but if you have no way of getting in front of the customer or these agencies, the economic buyer, then ultimately, the startup is broken because you can't actually get it in front of them. And so we really want to narrow down on what that looks like. The last element, we call this the acquisition source audit. So thinking of these interviews we had where there's a demonstrated pain point that we've heard, is we want to understand by mapping every existing user that we've talked to. One, who are they? What was the source we used to get in front of them? Was it a warm or cold lead? And if it was warm, then it's not as repeatable going forward, just because we're leveraging our existing network. And so you never really used a channel to communicate with them, because that's not something that the engaging the market cold allowed to ultimately build. So those would be the thought processes there, and some of the tools and frameworks you can dive into. So cool. All right. Let's see. Any last questions? Going once, twice, thrice. All right. Well, I'm going to call it there. So thank you, everyone, for your pre-submitting of the questions. So really robust questions submitted. So thank you for that. Keeps these weekly sessions going. Additionally, thanks for engaging live, those that are here. And then Isaac, thank you for sharing more about what you're building and some of the challenges you're looking to tackle around the early adopter space. Just remember that's going to be 16% of the market. So being really specific on who you're targeting is going to be key. And again, all roads lead to distribution. So how do you get in front of them efficiently and effectively? And then, is there a way to even do some of this manually to prove that you can ultimately coordinate those types of things going forward? And so with that, again, check out the Traction Lab Investment Readiness Engine and the Traction Lab Venture School. If you like this type of engagement, we do have the Traction Lab podcast, drops weekly. It's for first-time founders and founders that want to learn how to scale. We apply scientific principles to help founders scale, and we go through various scenarios to help you learn from those types of founders that ultimately have been there and navigate navigated some of those challenges. Additionally, we are live again. Today's Thursday, but usually on Fridays for our weekly startup reality check. So don't hesitate to continue to plug into these. And then lastly, I did throw in our traction thinking article. We drop weekly on Thursday, various types of content. Right now, we have a high conviction founder series where we go through some of the habits and skills that highly successful and high conviction founders have. So, with that, thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful 4th of July. Stay safe and look forward to seeing you about the ecosystem. So, thank you all. And with that, as always,